There's a certain kind of ache that doesn't scream. It lingers, a quiet echo in the chest. The weight of a conversation that never happened, the final word that never came. Maybe you felt it, staring at the ceiling at 2 a.m., wondering why they left the way they did, why it ended without an ending. We tell ourselves that if we just understood, if we had the reason, the apology, the closure, then we could finally breathe again. But what if I told you the closure you're chasing doesn't exist the way you think it does? The ancient Stoics, those calm minds in chaotic times, had already made peace with this truth. Epictetus said, "Freedom is the only worthy goal in life. It is won by disregarding things that lie beyond our control." Closure, they knew, is one of those things. You don't find it in someone else's explanation. You find it in your own release. And maybe that's the most surprising truth of all. You don't need closure to heal. You need choice. The choice to stop waiting for something that may never come. The choice to reclaim your peace, even without a perfect ending. If this message hit somewhere deep, like it did for us when we first wrote it, stay with us, like, comment, subscribe. Support our small corner of honest words and healing truths. Not for algorithms, but for people like you. The ones who feel deeply, think quietly, and just want something real in a world full of noise. This isn't closure, but maybe it's a beginning. Lesson 1. Not every ending comes with an explanation, and that's not your failure. One of the hardest pills to swallow is this. Sometimes the people who hurt you the most will walk away without ever explaining why. No apology, no clarity, just silence. And your mind will fill the empty space with questions. What did I do wrong? Did they ever care? How could they leave like that? You wait for a message, a confession, a last conversation that never comes. And somewhere deep inside, you begin to believe that without closure, you can't move on. That the chapter can't end unless someone else gives you permission. But the Stoics, who knew loss, betrayal, and uncertainty, would tell you this. Closure is not a gift someone else gives you. It's a decision you make for yourself. Epictetus said, when someone is properly grounded in life, they shouldn't have to look outside themselves for approval. The same applies to closure. You don't need their reasons to start healing. You don't need to understand their silence to reclaim your peace. Because the truth is, not every ending makes sense. And some people leave not because you were unworthy, but because they were unready, unavailable, or simply unwilling to grow. That's not your failure. That's their journey. When you base your healing on someone else's explanation, you give them power they don't deserve. Power over your peace, your future, your self-worth. But when you say, I may never get the ending I hoped for, but I still choose to move forward, you take that power back. You stop chasing clarity that was never yours to hold. You're not broken because someone didn't give you closure. You're just human. And maybe the bravest thing you'll ever do is walk away without answers and still choose to heal anyway. Lesson 2. You can't heal by rewriting a story that already ended. There's something in us, maybe it's the heart, maybe the ego, that wants to go back and fix what went wrong. We rewind the memories like film, frame by frame, searching for where it all unraveled. If I had just said this instead, if I hadn't let that moment slip, if they had loved me better. We replay, reword, reimagine, not to change the past, but because we can't bear how it ended. But here's the thing the Stoics knew. No amount of mental editing can change a story that has already been written, and trying to rewrite it only delays your healing. Marcus Aurelius, in the middle of war and loss, wrote, "Forget everything else. Keep hold of this alone, that you were born to not be turned by external things." The past is one of those external things. It's already happened. You're not weak for looking back. You're not foolish for wishing things had gone differently. That's part of grief, part of trying to understand something senseless. You're not broken because you keep going back to the past. You're just someone who loved deeply and wanted it to matter. But it's time to close the book. Not to forget, but to free yourself from the weight of what will never be rewritten. Lesson 3. Some questions will never be answered. But peace doesn't wait on explanation. What hurts more than the ending sometimes is the silence that follows it, the why that echoes in your chest. Why did they leave like that? Why did they stop caring? Why didn't they fight for me? You sit with those questions long after the moment has passed, hoping they'll resolve themselves. But days turn to months, and still no answers. And that's where the quiet pain lives, in the things you'll never understand. But here's what the Stoics understood, and what your soul may need to hear right now. You don't need all the answers to start living again. Epictetus once said, "It is not events that disturb people, it is their judgments concerning them." In other words, it's not always what happened that keeps us stuck. It's the belief that we must fully understand it before we're allowed to move on. But the truth is, some people will leave without reason. Some hearts will change without warning. Some endings will make no sense no matter how many times you dissect them. You're not broken because you don't understand what happened. You're not weak for wanting answers that never came. You're just exhausted from trying to solve a puzzle with missing pieces. And maybe the bravest thing you'll do is stop searching and start living anyway. Lesson 4. You don't need the person who broke you to be the one who fixes you. There's a quiet hope we carry after pain, that maybe the person who hurt us will come back and make it right, that they'll finally see what they did, say all the things we needed to hear, and somehow undo the damage. And we wait, sometimes not physically, but emotionally, holding space in our hearts for the apology, the remorse, the closure we think we need. But here's the truth, and it may hurt before it heals. You don't need the person who broke you to be the one who fixes you. The Stoics understood this deeply. They didn't expect peace to come from others, especially not from those who caused the wound. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." If someone walked away, treated you carelessly, or chose silence over truth, that speaks to their capacity, not your worth. You're not broken because someone else couldn't love you properly. You're not weak for wanting them to care. You're just human. But healing starts when you stop looking back at the one who hurt you for the healing they were never capable of giving in the first place. Lesson 5. Closure isn't the answer. It's often just a disguised need for control. There's a part of us that clings to the idea of closure not just for peace, but for control. We want to understand what happened so we can make sense of it, so we can protect ourselves from it happening again. We think, if I just get the full story, if I know why they changed, if I figure out where I went wrong, then we'll finally feel safe. But closure, in many cases, becomes a distraction from the deeper fear underneath. We don't like the unknown. We don't like not having the last word, and we don't like feeling powerless. The Stoics were painfully honest about control, or more specifically, about how little of it we actually have. Epictetus said, "Some things are up to us and some are not. The choices others make, not up to us. The way they left, what they said or didn't, what they felt, all outside our circle of influence. You're not broken because you still want to understand. You're just human. But you don't have to wait for closure to begin your healing. In fact, closure may never come, and that's okay. Because real peace is born not from controlling the ending, but from accepting you may never get one. Lesson 6, chasing closure can be a way of avoiding the next chapter. There's a strange comfort in waiting for closure. It feels like you're doing something, like you're still connected to what was, even if it hurts. You tell yourself that once you get that final conversation, that clear ending, then you'll move forward, then you'll feel ready. But what if, quietly, unknowingly, you've been using closure as a way to stall your own beginning? What if the hardest part isn't the lack of ending, but the fear of starting over without one? The Stoics spoke often about beginnings, not with grand gestures, but with grounded presence. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Begin. To begin is half the work. Let half still remain. Again begin this, and you will have finished." He knew that starting over isn't just an external act. It's internal. It's facing the truth that nothing you wait for will fix what's already gone, and that the life ahead of you cannot bloom while you're still watering the roots of something that no longer grows. Sometimes we chase closure because it's easier than facing the void. It gives us something to focus on, a story still open, a question still unanswered. But here's the gentle truth. You don't need closure to begin again. You just need willingness. Willingness to write a new story even when the last one ended in silence. Willingness to become someone new, even if you don't feel ready yet. Closure is not a doorway you pass through. It's a weight you choose to stop carrying. Lesson 7. Their silence isn't a reflection of your worth. One of the most haunting things about a lack of closure is the silence. Not just the absence of words, but the questions that echo inside it. Why didn't they say goodbye? Was I that easy to forget? Did I matter at all? We take their silence and make it mean something about us. That we were disposable, unworthy, unlovable. But here's what the Stoics would remind us. Other people's actions are not about our value. They're about their capacity. Epictetus taught that we suffer more not because of what others do, but because of what we believe it says about us. He said, "It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters." And silence, as painful as it is not proof of your inadequacy. It's proof of their inability. To communicate, to face discomfort, to offer closure with integrity. Sometimes people disappear not because you were easy to leave, but because they didn't know how to stay, or because they were never capable of holding your depth. You're not broken because someone didn't say goodbye. You're not forgotten just because they moved on without looking back. You're just tired. Tired of making someone else's silence louder than your own truth. And maybe it's time to stop waiting for them to speak and start listening to yourself instead. Lesson 8. Sometimes closure is just another way of holding on. There's a strange truth we don't always want to admit. Sometimes when we say we're waiting for closure, what we're really doing is clinging to the past. We're not just looking for answers. We're holding on to the hope that those answers might reopen a door, soften the goodbye, or somehow reverse the ending. We tell ourselves we need clarity to move on, but deep down, we're still looking for a reason not to. And the Stoics those masters of inner peace, would gently call us out here. They would remind us closure, when chased too long, becomes another form of attachment, and attachment to what is gone is the root of suffering. You're not broken for wanting to hold on. You loved, you tried, you cared. That's not weakness, that's human. But you don't have to carry the ending forever. Sometimes closure isn't found in their explanation. It's found in your decision to stop asking for one. You'll never be able to rewrite how it ended, but you can choose how you end the chapter, with strength, grace, and the quiet power of release. Lesson 9. The longer you wait for closure, the longer you put your life on hold. There's a particular kind of stillness that doesn't feel like peace. It feels like waiting. Waiting for the apology. Waiting for them to come back and say, "I didn't mean to hurt you." Waiting for the clarity that finally makes everything make sense. You tell yourself it's healing, that you're giving it time. But what you're really doing is pausing your life until someone else finishes a story they already walked away from. And that's the cost no one talks about. Not just the pain, but the delay it creates in your own becoming. The Stoics lived through loss, betrayal, exile, and they didn't wait for closure to move forward. They built peace without permission. Epictetus said, "How long are you going to wait before you demand the best for yourself?" It's not a question of blame. It's a call to return to yourself. You're not broken because you can't let go. You're just human and hopeful. But you deserve more than to live in emotional limbo. You deserve a life that isn't waiting on an ending that may never be delivered. The longer you wait for closure, the longer you delay your own freedom. Choose you, even without their explanation. Lesson 10. Peace can't be conditional on a past that wasn't fair. It's one of the hardest parts of healing, accepting that some things weren't fair and never will be. You didn't get the apology you deserved. You didn't get treated with the same care you gave. You were honest, and they weren't. You stayed, and they left. And even now, some part of you is still waiting for the scales to balance, still hoping that if you hold on just a little longer, the universe, or that person, will make it right. But here's the uncomfortable truth the Stoics understood. The world doesn't always give us what we deserve, and peace can't wait for fairness. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." It's not a dismissal of pain, it's a redirection of power. Because when you wait for the past to become fair before you allow yourself to feel peace, you keep yourself locked in a moment that cannot be changed. You chain your healing to something or someone who may never return what they took. You're allowed to feel angry, to grieve what didn't make sense, to say, "This should have ended differently." But peace only begins when you say, "Even though it didn't, I still choose to heal." That doesn't mean it wasn't wrong. It means you're done letting it define you. You can be wounded and still worthy of peace. Let that be the place you begin again, not with fairness, but with freedom. Lesson 11. Sometimes, what you're really looking for isn't closure. It's validation. When something ends without explanation, without kindness, without acknowledgement, it's not just the absence of answers that hurts. It's the absence of being seen. You wanted someone to look you in the eyes and say, "You mattered. What we had was real. You weren't imagining it." But instead you got silence, indifference, a vague excuse, a cold goodbye. And now you're left sifting through the wreckage, calling it closure. when what your heart is really aching for is validation, the kind that says, you weren't the only one who felt something here. You're not broken because you wanted to be seen. That's human. But you don't need to chase closure from someone who couldn't even offer honesty. You get to look at your reflection and say, I mattered, even if they couldn't say it. That's not weakness. That's power. That's the kind of closure that no one can take away. Lesson 12. You don't need them to acknowledge your pain for it to be real. There's something deeply disorienting about being hurt by someone who acts like nothing happened. You're left holding all the weight, the sadness, the confusion, the questions, while they move on as if you were just a chapter easily closed. And you think, how can they not care? Did it mean nothing to them? Am I the only one still hurting? You wait for them to reach out, to take accountability, to say something that proves your pain wasn't invisible. But the truth the Stoics understood, and what you may need to hear right now, is this. Your pain is valid even if the person who caused it never admits it. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The best revenge is not to be like your enemy," and that includes emotional revenge, the longing for them to hurt the way you did, or at least to acknowledge that they hurt you. But sometimes they don't. Sometimes they can't. Sometimes they won't. And if your healing depends on their remorse, you'll be stuck in a story that only they can finish. And they've already closed the book. You don't need their recognition to honor your recovery. Your healing belongs to you, and you never needed their permission to begin it. Lesson 13. Rumination feels like searching for closure. But it's really a loop that keeps you stuck. There's a pattern we fall into after someone leaves us without answers. We replay everything. The last conversation, the look in their eyes, the moment it shifted. We analyze their words, their silence, their exits. We rewrite text messages in our head. We imagine what we would say if we had just one more chance. It feels like problem solving. Like maybe if we just think it through one more time, we'll finally unlock the key to peace. But here's what the Stoics knew, and what your tired mind may need to hear. Rumination isn't reflection. It's a trap. It's the illusion of movement that keeps you emotionally stuck in the same place. Seneca once wrote, "To be everywhere is to be nowhere." And when your mind is constantly spinning backward into what was, what could have been, what never got said, you're nowhere. You're not in your present. You're not in your power. You're reliving pain, not resolving it. Sometimes closure looks like stepping out of the loop, saying, "This thought has nothing new to offer me," and choosing, even for a moment, to be here, in your body, in your breath, in the present you still get to shape. Lesson 14. Sometimes what we call closure is just the grief we haven't let ourselves feel. It's easy to say we're searching for closure, but what we're really doing, often without realizing it, is avoiding grief. We tell ourselves that we need answers, or we need that last conversation, or we need to understand why it ended. But beneath all of that is something softer, sadder, and far more human. We don't want to admit that something we loved is gone. The Stoics weren't afraid of grief. They just didn't let it own them. They believed in facing the truth of life as it is, not as we wished it would be. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Do not hanker after what you do not have. Instead, fix your attentions on the finest and best that you have." Closure isn't a door someone else needs to shut for you. Sometimes it's just the quiet, personal decision to finally let yourself grieve. Not just the breakup, not just the betrayal, You're not broken because you're still sad. You're not weak for feeling the ache linger long after the ending. You're just human and grieving something that mattered, and you don't need their closure to feel your sorrow. Sometimes the most honest kind of healing starts when you stop asking for answers and simply let the grief in, not to stay forever, but to finally move through you. Lesson 15. Wanting closure is often just wanting to feel in control again. Sometimes, closure isn't about needing to know why they left. It's about needing to feel like you're not at the mercy of someone else's choices. It's about wanting the situation to make sense, to feel clean, to be orderly in a world that just cracked open beneath your feet. Because when someone exits your life suddenly or unfairly, they don't just leave a space where they once stood. They take the ground beneath your trust, your confidence, your sense of safety, and in the chaos, you reach for something that will give it all meaning. Closure starts to feel like the only thing that can make the mess make sense. But the Stoics had a different kind of strength, one that didn't come from controlling outcomes, but from mastering their responses. Epictetus wrote, "Make the best use of what is in your power, and take the rest as it happens." Closure might never arrive in the way you imagined it, but clarity, peace, a reclaimed sense of self, those come when you remember that the only story you truly get to finish is your own. Lesson 16. Even if you got closure, it might not heal you the way you think. It's tempting to believe that if they just sat across from you and explained everything, if they finally told the truth, admitted the hurt, and gave you the apology you've played out in your head 100 times, you'd be free, that your heart would stop aching, that you'd sleep better, that you'd finally move on. But the deeper truth is this: even if you got every answer you're chasing, it still might not take the pain away. Because closure doesn't undo what happened. It doesn't rewind time. It doesn't fill the space where trust was broken or love was lost. And it rarely satisfies the emotional craving we attach to it. Why? Because what most of us really want isn't just information. We want to feel understood. We want to know it meant something. We want to feel like we mattered. But here's what the Stoics knew. Peace doesn't come from someone else fixing the past. It comes from you facing the present with honesty and courage. Marcus Aurelius said, "You have to assemble your life yourself, action by action." Healing works the same way. It's not found in someone else's words. It's found in the moment you stop waiting and start rebuilding. One breath, one boundary, one truth at a time. You're not broken because you still think about what they'd say if they came back. That's human. But you're stronger than you realize, because some part of you is already learning that even if they did come back, it still wouldn't change what you now know you deserve. Closure might feel like the answer, but healing, that's an inside job, and it's already happening quietly, bravely, in you. Lesson 17. Chasing closure can keep you emotionally tied to someone who let go a long time ago. There's a quiet heartbreak in realizing that you're still emotionally entangled with someone who's already moved on. Maybe they're living their life like nothing happened, while you're still playing scenes over in your mind. You keep hoping that if you just understood why they left, why they changed, why it ended the way it did, then maybe you'd be able to finally let go. Epictetus taught that our suffering doesn't come from events themselves, but from our attachment to them. Freedom is the only worthy goal in life, he wrote, and it is won by disregarding things that lie beyond our control. By making closure the thing you need in order to heal, you unknowingly keep yourself tied to the person who hurt you. You keep them in your thoughts, your decisions, your emotional space. At some point, the most loving thing you can do for yourself is stop calling it closure and start calling it what it really is: permission. Permission to move forward, even if the goodbye was silent. Permission to heal, even if the explanation never came. Peace isn't waiting in their next message. It's waiting in your next choice to finally release them. Lesson 18. Closure isn't about winning the story. It's about letting go of needing to be right. There's a moment in every heartbreak where you start rewriting the past in your head, not just to understand it, but to defend yourself against it. You think of all the things you should have said. You imagine the perfect moment where they finally admit, "You were right, I was wrong." Somewhere deep down, you believe that if you could just win the story, be the one who comes out looking better, wiser, more hurt, but more healed, you'd finally feel okay. But here's what the Stoics understood long ago. Your peace should never depend on proving your worth to someone who didn't recognize it when it mattered. Epictetus said, "If someone succeeds in provoking you, realize that your mind is complicit in the provocation." In other words, if you're still wrapped up in trying to win, trying to be seen as the one who was right, then you're still caught in the storm they left behind. And the truth is, winning the narrative doesn't heal the wound. It just keeps you inside it longer. You don't need to win the story to move on from it. You just need to stop reading it like it's still yours. Lesson 19. There's no deadline for moving on. Healing doesn't follow a schedule. Maybe you thought you'd be over it by now. Maybe people around you have stopped asking. Maybe even you have started to wonder, why am I still thinking about this? Why does it still hurt? You replay the timeline in your mind, comparing your grief to someone else's progress, measuring your healing against invisible milestones. And slowly, you start to mistake your pace for a lack of progress. But here's what the Stoics knew, and what you need to remember. Healing doesn't obey a schedule, and you don't owe the world a deadline for when you should be fine again. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Do not be ashamed of help. It takes the strength of character to admit when you need support." And that includes support from yourself. It includes the grace to say, "I'm still healing," even if it's been months or years since the hurt first happened. Some wounds close quietly. Others linger in layers. There's no right way to grieve what could have been. Chasing closure often comes with the illusion that once you get it, you'll be healed by morning. But peace doesn't come like that. It's not a switch. It's a return. A slow returning to yourself, to your breath, to your worth. One day, maybe even without noticing, you'll stop checking your phone. You'll stop rehearsing that conversation in your head. You'll stop needing closure at all. And maybe the most powerful kind of closure isn't rushing to let go, but allowing yourself to take your time. Lesson 20. Some people can't give you closure because they were never emotionally equipped to begin. With sometimes the most painful part of chasing closure is realizing that the person you're waiting on was never capable of giving you the clarity or care you're hoping for. Maybe they were emotionally unavailable. Maybe they ran from discomfort. Maybe they never learned how to handle confrontation, accountability, or connection beyond the surface. And still, you keep hoping. Hoping they'll suddenly show up as someone new, someone deeper, someone more honest, someone who finally gets it. But here's the truth the Stoics lived by. You cannot receive emotional closure from someone who was never emotionally present to begin with. Epictetus reminded us, it is not things themselves that disturb us, but our opinions about them. And one of the most painful opinions we hold is that someone should be able to give us the healing moment we crave. The apology, the explanation, the validation. You're not broken for wanting something deeper. You're not foolish for hoping they'd come back with clarity and kindness. But your healing cannot stay chained to someone else's limitations. You don't need their growth to start yours. You don't need their words to write your next page. Closure, in its truest form, is accepting that not everyone will give you what you deserved, and still choosing to give yourself what you need anyway. Lesson 21. Sometimes the absence is the closure. We tend to think of closure as a moment, a conversation, a letter, a tearful explanation that ties it all together and makes the ending feel complete. We wait for it, we crave it, we build stories around it. But what if the silence was the message? What if the unanswered texts, the avoidance, the ghosting, or the way they moved on so quickly, was all the closure we were ever going to get? And what if, deep down, we already knew that, but weren't ready to accept it? The Stoics believed in accepting reality as it is, not as we wish it to be. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Don't hope that events will turn out the way you want. Welcome events in whichever way they happen. This is the path to peace." That includes the way people leave us, their absence, as heartbreaking, confusing, or abrupt as it may be, is an answer. It tells you about their capacity. It tells you about the relationship. It tells you that you deserve better, even if it doesn't come with a neat explanation. You're not broken because you still wanted more. You're not weak because you hoped they'd show up differently. But at some point, the most honest thing you can do is look at the empty space they left behind and stop waiting for it to be filled. Sometimes, the closure we're begging for has already happened. It just didn't look the way we wanted it to. Let that be enough. Let their absence be your permission to begin again, not with bitterness, but with the clarity that you're no longer waiting for someone who chose not to stay. Lesson 22. Closure doesn't mean forgetting. It means learning to carry the memory differently. There's a quiet fear that comes up when you start healing. The fear that if you let go, if you stop searching for closure, you'll forget them, that the story will lose meaning, that what you shared will disappear, or that moving on means pretending it didn't matter. And so, you keep holding on, not just to the pain, but to the idea that closure means severing all emotional ties. But the Stoics would tell you otherwise. Marcus Aurelius, who knew grief intimately, once said, "What stands in the way becomes the way." Closure doesn't erase what happened. It teaches you how to hold it differently. It's not about forgetting. It's about no longer letting the memory rule your present. You can still remember the love without reopening the wound. You can carry the lessons without carrying the hurt. You can hold space for what was real without letting it define what comes next. We often think we have to pick a side. Either we keep loving them in some quiet way, or we cut it all off and pretend it never happened. But closure lives in the middle space. It says, yes, it mattered. Yes, it hurt. And no, I don't need to carry it like this forever. Closure doesn't ask you to forget. It asks you to remember differently, with grace, with space, and without letting the past own your future. Lesson 23. Closure doesn't arrive. It evolves. We're taught to expect closure as a moment, A door closing, a conversation ending, a final text message that wraps everything up with clarity. We think it comes in a sudden wave of relief, like the last page of a novel or the final scene of a film. But healing doesn't work like that. And closure, more often than not, doesn't arrive. It evolves, slowly, quietly. In the background of your life while you're doing the dishes, taking walks, and relearning how to breathe without them. The Stoics knew this long before us. Epictetus said, "Don't demand that things happen as you wish, but wish that they happen as they do, and you will go on well." We don't get to dictate how healing unfolds. It doesn't come with an email subject line or a perfect goodbye. It comes in pieces. A little more peace today than yesterday. A little less weight in your chest. A moment where you realize you haven't thought of them in hours. And then days. Closure isn't something you chase down. It's something you grow into. One small step, one hard realization, one quiet act of self-compassion at a time. You're not broken because it's taking longer than you thought. You're not failing because you still catch yourself wondering what could have been. And that's what closure really is. Not a final word, but a new relationship with what was. One that no longer asks you to pause your life to understand it. Lesson 24. Healing doesn't need their permission. One of the deepest traps in chasing closure is the belief that your healing somehow depends on them, on what they say, on how they explain it, on whether they come back to finally do right by you. You might not say it out loud, but there's often a lingering hope that if they validate your pain or admit their mistake, then you'll be free. But the Stoics knew better. Marcus Aurelius said, "You have power over your mind, not outside events." And that includes people's apologies, explanations, or emotional growth. You don't need their permission to start healing. Waiting for someone else to acknowledge your worth only delays your own acknowledgement of it. You already know what you gave. You already know how deeply you cared. Their refusal to rise to the moment doesn't get to hold your peace hostage. You're not broken for wanting it to end differently, but you're allowed to begin again without them. You're allowed to heal without their blessing, their closure, or their voice. Because healing has never required someone else's permission, just your own. Lesson 25. Closure isn't found, it's chosen. We search for closure like it's something we'll stumble upon, in a message, in a moment, in the right words that finally make it all make sense. But here's what the Stoics, in their quiet strength, knew all along. Closure isn't found at the end of the story. It's chosen by the one who's ready to stop reading it. Epictetus said, "Freedom is the only worthy goal in life." And that freedom doesn't arrive from understanding why they left, or why it ended the way it did. It arrives when you decide to stop waiting for someone else to give you peace, and choose to give it to yourself. Closure is a choice, not because it erases the pain, but because it refuses to be ruled by it. It's not about pretending it didn't matter. It's about deciding it doesn't get to define what happens next. You're not broken because you didn't get the perfect goodbye. You're just human, but you're also powerful. Powerful enough to close the chapter with your own hands. And that right there is closure. If you've read this far, then you already know. This wasn't really about closure. Not the kind you thought you needed anyway. This was about something deeper. Your capacity to let go of what never gave you peace. To make room for your own healing, even when the apology never came. Because the truth is, You were never waiting for their words. You were waiting to feel whole again. And that feeling, it's not waiting out there in someone else's mouth. It's been inside you all along, quietly asking for your attention. The Stoics didn't need dramatic goodbyes. They didn't chase clarity from those who walked away. They focused on what they could control. And that's the invitation for you now, to come back to yourself, to your breath, your strength, your story, to realize that closure isn't something someone else gives you. It's something you claim. You don't need the door to be gently closed to know you deserve to walk through a new one. You don't need the person who hurt you to fix what they broke. You don't need the perfect ending to write a powerful beginning. You just need to decide that you are worth more than waiting in someone else's silence. So here's to the peace that doesn't come from understanding, but from release. Here's to the strength that isn't loud, but steady. Here's to the freedom that begins when you stop chasing what's already gone and finally come home to yourself. If this series spoke to something real in you, we invite you to stay, like, subscribe, support this quiet corner of truth and tenderness, not because you owe us anything, but because maybe, just maybe, you're ready to choose yourself. And that, more than closure, changes everything.